Welcome back to That's Not Proper, and I'm your host, Corey Asuncion. On today's episode, I'm going to be talking about COVID-19, the pandemic, and when it hits home. It hit our home, and I want to talk a little bit about what that felt like because it was not what I thought it was going to feel like. Really quick before we get started with today's episode, I just want to thank all my listeners out there and let you know that I truly, truly appreciate you. And I want to encourage you to subscribe, rate and review That's Not Proper on whichever podcast platform you are listening on, and check out my website, that'snotproper.com. Okay, let's go back for just a moment to when the pandemic hit where I live. I live in Northern California, Silicon Valley, and the area that we live in, the shelter in place, went into effect in the middle of March. In fact, it was shortly after my oldest daughter's birthday. And so the shelter in place goes into effect. The area that I live in at that time in March, we had the most cases, I believe, as far as positive cases within the state. And that's no longer the situation, but at the time, that's what it was. And it honestly made effect. We're a really densely populated area. We've got two major airports. Totally made sense with regards to what was going on that we would probably have that surge initially. That's no longer the case. However, our area, I feel like when I look at what's been going on with regards to the city I live in and the county that I'm in, have been really good about masks and hand sanitizer, and businesses have not really been letting anybody in without a mask for quite some time. Some areas it's just recently happening. I'm saying like a couple months it's been required to enter a business with a mask. You couldn't go in, period. However, you go about 40 miles away and it's a whole other ball game. Really weird, by the way, that was. I had to take my son somewhere in a city that was about 40 to 60 miles away. We had to go to a couple places and they were not all wearing masks. Employees weren't wearing masks. They were sort of ish requiring them in businesses, but not really because there was a ton of people. And they kind of looked at me like I was some sort of freak because I was wearing a mask. And now keep in mind, I have 2 type 1 diabetic children, so they're high risk, and I care for an elderly man, and he's high risk. So I feel like we were being really, really vigilant as far as how we handled cleanliness, going out and trying to not go out. We didn't have people over, those kinds of things. We've been really, really good about doing that. Well, over the course of these 4-ish months, I've thought that I was really being hyper vigilant, even mentally. But now when I kind of look back, I feel like, you know what? I think I kind of put some stuff like in the back of my mind. I mean, really, there was a point at the beginning of all this. I thought, oh, this will be over by June. We'll have a big barbecue and everything will be fabulous. You know, I haven't seen my oldest daughter really, but briefly for a moment, once or twice, which includes my 4 grandsons. And as a grandparent, if any of you out there are grandparents, it's hard to not see your grandkids, and they are sad, and they want to know why they can't see grandma and grandpa, and they want to know where the sickness is at. Is it at grandma's house? Those kind of questions that are difficult to answer. So we've been doing a couple different things, videos and things like that, but really haven't gotten to see them. And my youngest grandson at the time of the pandemic was only a couple months old. And if you know anything about children, also 4 months is a huge amount of time when you're talking about an infant now becoming, a borderline toddler, starting to crawl, doing all these things, recognizing faces. And I haven't gotten to be there for that. And that sucks. But if it means the safety of my grandchildren, my daughters, my sons, everybody here at my house, and anybody in my community, I'm okay with that. But it does suck. So fast forward, a couple weeks ago, we find out that my daughter, one of my daughters, was very directly exposed to COVID-19. And it was the weirdest reaction I felt for myself. So we get the confirmation that she's definitely been exposed. And the way testing is working, which by the way makes me nuts. I understand why, but it doesn't change the fact that it makes me nuts. The thing is when she was exposed, the last day from when she was exposed to when we actually found out and had confirmation that she had been exposed was 9 days, I believe, which is kind of a really long time. Now, during those 9 days, the person that she had been exposed to, we kind of thought, no way, because the symptoms were essentially asymptomatic. They had a couple things going on, but nothing that really sounded like everything you're hearing within the media as far as, the cough, or even if it was a mild cough or a fever, the symptoms were not really like that. And so honestly, we kind of thought there's no way. Now, thankfully, my children are older, so it's not like you have toddlers running around that are, touching everything, licking everything, you're kissing on them. That doesn't really happen with older kids. So that wasn't a concern. However, now we found out, okay, so my daughter was exposed and we didn't know for sure for 9 days. And so during that entire time, we realized, shit, we've all been exposed now, because if she's been exposed and this person is positive with that, which is what we found out, that means during that 9 days, it's very likely that we've been exposed if she has it. And it was a panic. So immediately my daughter put herself into quarantine. And it's funny because everyone's like, oh, just quarantine. I hear a lot of talk about that. But to tell your child, hey, go sit in a room by yourself, don't come out, have no contact with us, and essentially, I don't know, treat them like they've got leprosy or something, it's really difficult. And thankfully, she was like, that's it. She immediately went to her room that she shares with her sister who was kicked out, and decided that she was going to quarantine herself in there. She began ordering foods and Instacart and all that kind of stuff. She didn't even want us to enter the room. To be fair, I would go by the room and open the door and, stay far away and just be like, I love you. I miss you. Are you lonely? And usually the replies were, I love you. We say that a lot in our family, but also, yes, I'm lonely. Yes, I miss you, but I'm okay staying in here if it means that I don't infect, my brothers who are type 1 diabetics, or the elderly man that we care for downstairs. Now, just a tidbit about the elderly man, just so everyone knows, my kids really don't have any interaction with him. So we weren't super concerned about that. And he's not very mobile. That's primarily myself and my partner. So we were able to keep a lid on that, because already we're kind of hyper vigilant as far as being really, really hygienic with regards to him anyhow. So we weren't too concerned, but it does put you on high alert. What threw me off with regards to all of this was my response. This entire time, I've kind of expected we're going to get it at some point. If any of you out there have children, especially if you have a couple children, and if they're in the school system or daycare or anything like that, how quick something as simple as a common cold can spread through the house just by them going to daycare or to school, or, a play date or something like that. And so when you have 6 children at home, because I have 6 still at home, and someone gets sick, that the likelihood of it running the gamut through your entire home is pretty great. And, it's not like the stars could align beautifully and everybody gets it all at once so we can all be done quickly. The way it usually works is each person gets it at various times, and this thing could go on for 2, 3, 4 months. And so with coronavirus, I was a little bit concerned with regards to how that would play out if we got it. So now we find out it's in our home. And here's what was crazy that came to mind at first, is it felt kind of like if you have ever been robbed, just that feeling where someone's been here or something's been here. So in this case, it was coronavirus, but compare that to an intruder. An intruder's in my home. This intruder has touched things, seen things, been around things. Where did they go? What did they touch? And there's like a violation feeling. And that's kind of what I felt like. And so I became emotional. And I'm not a super emotional person, but I could feel myself reeling, like what's going to happen. And I'm running around the house thinking, what do I Clorox wipe now? Do I start in the bathroom, in the kitchen, bedrooms, couches, kitchen table? What do I do? I don't know what to do. And then I look at my kids and I could see some of them starting to see me panic, which, that's usually never very good. So I'm trying to reel it in. And then I look at my daughters, and my daughters are in tears. And keep in mind, these aren't little girls anymore. My daughters that are still at home are 20 and 23. And so to see them cry, it broke me. And I asked what's the reason for the tears? I mean, I could guess, but I want to have them communicate it to me. And they were afraid. Who did we give it to? And they were most concerned about their younger brothers. And so we go into this hyper mode of, okay, what can we do? And that's kind of how I deal with panic and anxiety or stress is I feel more comfortable and more stable if I can be active. I don't know if it's a good response or not, but that's what I do. So in that situation, because I couldn't clean the house thoroughly enough, I decided, okay, everyone needs to get tested. And so within, I don't even know, maybe 8 hours, at least 5 had been tested. Funny thing about testing. Now, thankfully, I was able to get 5 of them tested in that first 8-hour period. But it wasn't quite as easy as you would think it would be. And there's a whole, we can have a whole conversation about that because they get tested and they're told 2 to 3 days we're going to get the responses. Then we were told 5 to 7 days and then 8 to 10 and then 21. I mean, it was insane. And keep in mind, some of my kids have jobs and so they couldn't work because they had to call into work. And work wants to know when they're going to be back and they can't tell them when they're going to be back because they have no clue. And so they're getting calls every day. It was mayhem, and testing is definitely not what I thought it would be. But back to my panic. So I get the kids tested, which keeping active and driving around. And it took several hours to get this all arranged and set up and wait on the tests and all those kinds of things. They're sitting in a car. They came out to the car. They wouldn't allow you inside. So you feel, again, a little leper-like. And then my daughter locked herself in the room. And I can't even begin to tell you what a strange and painful feeling that was. It seems so simple. She's locked in her room. Her door's closed. Woo, it's quiet. There's not one less kid. No. It was really difficult to walk up and down the hallway and see this door closed and know that behind that door was my daughter alone. Probably a little bit afraid because I know I was. Wondering, is it going to hit her hard? Is she going to get really sick? Am I going to get a call in the middle of the night from her phone? Because that's how we were communicating within the house, was via text, that says, I need to go to the hospital. It's something crazy. This is, by the way, my mind reeling out of control. Am I going to go knock on the door? She's not going to respond because she's not breathing and or dead. I didn't know what was going to happen. And it is a terrifying feeling. And I truly did not expect to feel that way because I guess even though I said it'll probably hit us, I didn't think I'd be so concerned. And I wasn't necessarily concerned about myself. I was concerned about my kids, and I was concerned about the rest of the household, and I was concerned about my community. I mean, I went even a little nutty and I was online researching statistics and numbers for COVID-19 across the world, in my state, across the United States. In addition to that, I went online to find out how many flu deaths there had been because I wanted to compare the two. I should probably note that I'm a little bit of a researcher / digger. That's just how I do things. So again, this was probably a way I just coped with it. But it was really, really difficult. And it was a weird mental feeling. So first I compared it to an intruder. So my initial reaction was, there's an intruder. I've been violated, or we've been violated. And then as the time went on where my daughter had to stay in quarantine, I was like, this feels like a race that never ends. And so just imagine for a moment, you're running a race. And normally in a race, you have an end. There's the whatever that tape is that's there, and there's an end, and there's someone who completes the race. It felt like it was not going to end. It felt, and does that sound irrational? Maybe it does. Every day felt like, at what point will this end? So if I was running a race and the race never ended, at what point are my legs going to give out? Am I going to collapse? And I can't collapse right now because I have people relying on me, and my daughter needs me, and what do we do and where do we go? And yeah, I had to pull myself up out of a spiral several times during her quarantine period. So just so everybody knows, my daughter made it through. And thankfully, she never got any very severe symptoms. I know for a fact, obviously, that we didn't experience what many people in this world, in this nation, in this state have experienced as far as severe illness and death from this. And I can't even begin to empathize properly with those people. But what I have to say is at this point for me, and watching this happen with regards to my daughter and our family, it really changed my perspective in a couple ways on various things. It made me check my response to stressful situations and how I saw I was affecting my kids. But in addition to that, it made me check my response as far as not everything has to be a positive response, something I talked about in a previous episode that I definitely struggle with. I always want to be positive. I felt no positivity during this. And I think that that was okay for a moment, but I couldn't let myself spiral completely out. On the other hand, right now in our nation, we have this whole thing where people don't believe it's real and all of that. Well, I'm going to tell you what. Whether or not you believe it's real is irrelevant. It feels mighty fucking real when it hits home and you wonder if your kid's going to die. That feels real. So on Instagram, I shared a photo, and it's of two of my daughters laying on a blow-up mattress in the living room, both of them, of course, staring at their phones. But I almost cried when I saw them laying like that. That photo was taken the day that my daughter was able to come out of her room from quarantine. And I will tell you right now, when she came out, we hugged her, we cried a little bit. I probably wanted to cry harder, but I left the room, so I didn't. And then I watched them go into the living room and hang out together and lay on the mattress and just want to be near each other. My family is a very close, tight-knit family. Sometimes that happens when you're a big family in a small space. But to see the two of my daughters come together, miss each other, even though they were in the same house but separated, wondering and worrying about one another, and then see them come together to just hang out once again in a situation that felt like forever but was in reality not. It makes you just kind of appreciate each other a little bit more. And so when I looked at the two of them laying on that blow-up mattress in the middle of the living room, I could only be thankful, and I could only get teary-eyed. And I could only appreciate the fact that my children do really love each other. But one of the big things I learned with regards to having COVID hit home is that sometimes no matter what you do, shit happens. And you can only do so much to get through it. But the fact that we were able to come together as a family, and my kids were able to come together, and we were able to approach it in a way that made it like a path, and we had steps, even though some of those steps felt chaotic, it was a good feeling. Now, I do have to say from here, we're probably going to have to readdress a few different things as far as areas that maybe we were lax in, that we didn't really recognize we were lax in. I'm not going to be afraid. I don't have fear, like panic kind of fear, really. Mild, maybe. The virus does not control my life, but it does make you more aware of how quickly things could shift, and that there's no way to plan for it, and that all you can do is take it one step at a time. And that even though it looks like there was an intruder and the race is never going to end, It will, even though it's a tiny bit terrifying. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. Remember to tune in to next week's episode of That's Not Proper.